This episode is brought to you by CoolStuffInc.com, the #1 seller of games and gaming accessories. And GatheringMagic.com, the #1 resource for Magic the Gathering news and articles.
Hi, my name is Ben Cadle, and this is my Multani Maro-Sorcerer Commander deck. So first I'll talk about Multani as a commander. He costs 4 green, and he has 2 abilities. The first is Shroud, which obviously is a very nice ability for a commander to have. Basically, it makes the only way that you're able to get to deal with him with counterspells or sweeper effects. The second one is his power toughness, which is determined by the total cards in players' hands. So this includes yourself, this includes your opponents, and if you're playing Two-Headed Giant, it includes your allies. It's everybody counting up their hands and determining his power and toughness. Therefore, he's a very excellent multiplayer general because he scales so well with players. And even in a one-on-one, he's often a 6/6 or more, just based on the amount of cards in players' hands. But as I said, in multiplayer games, he's often a really giant monster, at least a 10/10. Sometimes I've one-shot people with general damage with him. It's definitely happened, and he's definitely a force to be reckoned with in multiplayer. First, we're going to start with the tokens that I have in the deck. We go through them real quickly. Plant, Wolf, Beast, Elephant, and Star Oozes. We're going to start with what any good mono-green EDH deck starts with, lots of force. So might as well just go through a lot of them right here. There's around 30 force in the deck. They're very useful for the various mana doublers I run, which I'll get to in a little bit. Alright, getting close to the end. Alright. So the first non-basic land we have is Gaia's Cradle. Obviously, one of the most busted lands that you can play in EDH. Often tapping, I mean, even when it's tapping for 2, it's obviously a great deal. One of the lands that I often tutor for. This can break games wide open just by being on the battlefield. Next we have Oran-Rief, the Vastwood. It's useful for just giving a small boost to some of the guys and making some of the token makers I have in the deck a lot better. It's also useful for comboing with Woodfall Primus, which I'll get to later. Next we have Mosswort Bridge. Multani is often at least a 10/10, or you could just oftentimes just assemble enough power on the board to get to the 10 power requirement you need. And of course, just casting really big spells for the cheap is always a great deal. Next we have Homeward Path. This deck has a lot of really spicy mind control and bribery targets, and being able to get Homeward Path and protect your deck from those blue decks that would otherwise steal your big creatures is a pretty important thing, and is a nice thing to have on a land. Next we have Mikokoro, Center of the Sea. There was a more equal draw effect theme in the deck for a while because Multani obviously scales with such cards like Howling Mine and Temple Bell, but as the power level of the deck has risen, those were some of the first cards to get cut. So this is basically the last equal draw card in the deck, and it's still pretty good at what it does because it's still on the land, and sometimes you just need a little bit more gas, and it's pretty helpful then. Finally, we have Reliquary Tower. This is a really important addition to the deck, as I'll discuss in the first set of cards that I talk about. It's very helpful for keeping the really large hand sizes that sometimes happens due to the next 3 cards, which I'll explain. So these cards essentially are, I would say, like the main plan of Multani. Generally, what I'm trying to do is cast Multani and then using these spells draw a lot of cards and then try and win based off drawing 10-15 cards. So the first one is the weakest one. It's Momentous Fall. It's the weakest because it's a one-shot effect, and and obviously have to sacrifice Multani in order to do it. But it's still really good at what it does. It's you draw cards equal to the sacrifice creature's power. So obviously when Multani's big on the field due to multiple players, if like Multani can't get through to players, then drawing 10, 15 cards often allows you just to win the game from there. So, this is, like I said, it's the weakest one because it's a one-shot, but it does gain your life, which is relevant sometimes. The next one's easily the best card for doing this is Greater Good. This is a criminally underplayed card in mono green because it's what Greater Good allows you to do in terms of just trading creatures for a lot of cards is completely bonkers, and often I've won many games that I've played Greater Good in. Just like one of the more insane things that you can do is just like if you have a lot of mana, like 20 mana for instance, and then you have Greater Good on the field, then you have Multani on the field. You sacrifice Multani to Greater Good to like draw 10 cards. So then you replay Multani and sacrifice it again to draw 20 cards because you just doubled your hand. So you draw double the cards again. And just the fact that you can just like chain lots of creatures like that is excellent. Not to mention that it's pretty good with creatures like Genesis or Woodfall Primus, again, reusing that ability. And Multgraph Monstrosity using that ability as well. But the final card that we have for the big draw suite is Garruk Primal Hunter. A lot of times he's just the 5 mana and then immediately use the -3 to draw a bunch of cards. He's great because you don't have to sacrifice the creature involved to get the cards. And but you can also set him up so you can have him stick around, so you can just like +1 him for a turn and then activate the -3 next turn, and then just, try to make beast tokens from there. It's a little bit more risky because there's a fair amount of ways to kill planeswalkers in EDH, but nonetheless he's great because his ability doesn't really get countered by removal. I mean, especially if you have Multani out anyway, it's pretty sure that it's going to go off. Next we have the mana acceleration in the deck. First we have the infamous Soul Ring. I mean, not much to be said about this card. This card, it really does make all EDH decks better. It's the only real artifact acceleration I have in the deck. Most of the other ones are land-based. But yeah, sorry. Next we have Joraga Treespeaker. I'd say I put her somewhere between a Soul Ring and a Worn Power Stone. She's an excellent turn 1 play that can lead to having 5 mana on turn 3 is pretty nice, especially since you still have 2 mana on turn 2 to potentially, cast for Fellows or Sakura-Tribe Elder, etc. And speaking of Sakura-Tribe Elder, he's next. Just a simple rampant growth for a forest in this deck, but the fact that he's a creature is a lot more relevant makes him a lot more relevant than rampant growth. He can be rebought. He can get back with Genesis. He can be put under Mimic Vat. He can block a really big creature before getting a land. He's pretty good. Next we have Wood Elves. Nothing much to say about this, just to get a simple forest. Next we have both Kodamas Reach and Cultivate. Not all the mono green decks I see are playing these cards, and I'm not exactly sure why. I know that it's really good for its fixing purposes, but the fact that you get 2 lands and you're getting 2 lands, like sometimes you just got to keep the 3-landers, and the fact that if you have a 3-lander and you have this card in hand, well, you're at least getting the 5 mana. So like I said, these are pretty good cards to have. Next we have Yavimaya Elder. He's really great when you have Multani out because he's a 3-for-1 because he draws you a card and gets you 2 basic lands. So it's a good way to pump up Multani a little bit. We have Skyshroud Claim, which is admittedly better in a multicolor deck because he can fetch out dual lands that are forests like Tropical Island and Taiga, but he's still really good in this deck because the forests still come into play on tap, so you can still do things with the forest if you want to. Now we're on to our mana doublers, which the first is the infamous for Fellows. He's the card that I'm tutoring for in the early turns most of the time, and he's the most scariest card of this deck, of any mono green deck, honestly. the fact that he jumps you to 6 mana on turn 3 and 8 mana on turn 4, it's people generally lose those games. I mean, I just remember one time I had a Whirly Tutor in hand in Rafellos, and the fact that I'm Whirly Tutoring for Primeval Titan to play it on turn 3 is just not a good sign for those players that I was playing with. Next we have Extraplanar Lens. It's a little bit of a risky one, but generally I don't play it unless I intend on doing something big that turn. So it's nice in that aspect. Generally you can use your like artifact mana or your colorless mana sources to cast it, and then have all your most of your forest tapped for double. So yeah, Extraplanar Lens. You have Gauntlet of Power, kind of in the same vein as Extraplanar Lens. He also, the +1/+1 to green creatures is actually kind of relevant sometimes too. The Cage Sun is obviously the Gauntlet of Power, but just for me, a little bit better, in my opinion. Next we have some tutors. First we have Whirly Tutor. That's a quintessential creature tutor that you can have. I mean, I'd say 50% of the time I'm casting this on turn 1 to find Rafellos, and the other 50% of the time I'm casting it for whatever I need. Chant removal or creature removal, etc. We have Expedition Map, the easy land tutor in the deck. I'd say I find Gaia's Cradle a third of the time. I find Reliquary Tower another third of the time because I have a lot of cards in hand that I don't want to get rid of. And just finding a forest the other third of the time, because sometimes you just got to use it to get enough lands to play. Next we have Time of Need. This is a really excellent card. I love this card in mono green, and if you can make this card work in a green deck, then you should definitely play it, because at this point, I mean, in my deck, it's essentially a Demonic Tutor for Rafellos, or if I need something big, Kamal or Ulamog. I mean, the fact that it can find all of those is a really excellent thing. The fact that it puts it in hand is also really good. So if you have a couple of nice legendaries in your deck that you're wanting to find and you're playing green, I'd definitely suggest trying out this card. Next we have Green Sun Zenith. Pretty self-explanatory. Finding green creatures, it's really flexible in what it does. Next we have Chord of Calling. This is kind of a new addition to the deck. I was kind of just figuring out and trying it. Obviously a lot better if you make a lot of tokens like I do with Avenger of Zendikar or Wolfbriar Elemental. But yeah, I haven't played much with it yet, so we'll see how this goes. Next I have what they call the Interaction Suite. So this is basically all the cards that interact with my opponent's permanents. We start with Ulvenwald Tracker, which is the newest addition to the deck from Absent Restored, and this guy is a beast. Even though I can't use Multani to fight other creatures, I do have a lot of other big fatties that allow him to allow Ulvenwald Tracker to pick off a lot of creatures that I wouldn't otherwise want to have on the battlefield. So yeah, he's turned out to be a really nice addition. Next we have Beast Within. Obviously very versatile at what it does, and I honestly don't care about a 3/3 at all, so the fact that I can destroy anything with it is pretty nice. We have Oblivion Stone. Sometimes you just gotta sweep, and this is one of the best sweepers. Next we have Nevriddle's Disc. Again, this Nevriddle's Disc is really nice as a sweeper, and it's more, and obviously I think for the people that have played Nev Disc, it's really nice to just like play early and just have there, like even if you're like doing well, because it's just nice for it to be on the battlefield, because it's really hard to count on it if you like really need it and you have to play it. That's like, you want the Nev Disc to happen the turn you play it, but obviously a lot of times people can come up with an answer if you really needed the disc. So just be aware to play it early and use it as a deterrent later. Next we have Wickerbough Elder. I like him more than the one card from Ravnica that I'm blanking on right now. That counts 5 and does the same thing. I like him because he's you can do it at instant speed and his ability, and you can play him early. And like people often just forget he's on the battlefield, and it's nice to be able to pick off something that's good. Next we have Acidic Slime, pretty standard addition to a green deck, because it's just mostly because of its really nice flexibility and the fact that it has Death Touch. We have Duplicate for removing really pexy creatures and generals, and he's the one creature that I could find that could remove things with, say, Chord of Calling or Worldly Tutor. Next we have Karn Liberated. This guy's real powerhouse. I mean, a lot of times he just comes down as a 7-mana exile target permanent, because then the player kills it in the next turn. But if you ever land Karn on an empty board, he just completely dominates the game afterwards. Next we have Woodfall Primus. Obviously combos really well with Greater Good and Oran-Rief the Bastard. In fact, that's the silly combo where you're drawing 6, discarding 3, killing a non-creature permanent every turn. But yeah, he's really good at, he's pretty big, and the fact that he can come back twice is really nice. And finally, for the interaction, we have Terastodon, which is really useful for removing multiple things at once that are causing problems. Or just making your own army if you just kill some things that you don't care about. So now we're on to our utility spells, which we start off with Sensei's Dividing Top. Yeah, not a lot of people like playing with Top, but I'm not going to deny that it's definitely found me answers to potential problems and helped me just, dig through more of my deck because of it. And that's the reason why it's in here, really. Next we have Concordant Crossroads, and this is how you win after drawing 10 or 15 cards with Greater Good or Momentous Fall. And this is obviously one of the cards you really want to hit off your really big Genesis wave, because the fact that it allows you to swing out the turn you play a lot of big things makes people's answers gradually smaller in terms of like having a lot of creatures on board. Then the Wrath doesn't save them. Then they need to have counter spells. So the fact that this card, it will, trust me, for people playing mono green, this card will win you more games if it's in your deck. Next we have Magus of the Library. He's pretty close to the Library of Alexandria, actually. When you're playing a multiplayer, he's always going to be turned on because every player draws during their opening turn. So you don't have to worry about going first and not having another card to turn on Magus. And the fact that he could draw you 3-4 cards in the beginning of the game is really excellent for its price. And the fact that he still taps for mana later on is pretty nice as well. Next we have Sylvan Library. Obviously a lot better than Sensei's Dividing Top, since it can help you draw a lot more cards, since in EDH the fact that you have a lot more life means that you can spend 4 life on a card every now and then. Next we have Regrowth. It's pretty standard addition to a green deck. The fact getting back cards that people have killed, or that you've reusing important cards like Genesis Wave, is obviously really nice to do. Next we have Primal Rage. There's a couple cards here in this section that kind of help Multani be able to get through. Primal Rage is one of them. Gives all creatures trample. I'm sorry about that. Gives all creatures trample, and basically it's just giving Multani trample, since he has Shroud, and he had the effects that I have to use in order to help him get through in combat have to be global like this. Next we have Lightning Greaves, the only equipment in the deck, since equipment and Multani don't really mix very well. But the fact that, giving Raphaelos Haste and Shroud is pretty nice, and giving Ulamog Haste is nice, and just a lot of my big fatties, just allowing them to be able to swing the same turn is pretty nice, and that's the reason why it's in this deck. Next we have Eternal Witness, obviously the regrowth with the body, that's really nice with Mimic Vad and hitting it off of Genesis Wave, etc. Speaking of Mimic Vat, we have that here. It's an excellent versatile card that allows you to reuse your creatures after people have killed them, and allows you to potentially have steal your opponent's things when they die, like their better things, like Consecrated Sphinxes and Iotas and things like that. Also useful for shutting down graveyard strategies, potentially, if they like to sacrifice things from the battlefield to the graveyard. Next we have Brawn. Obviously combos well with Multani. When it's in the graveyard, all creatures have trample. So that's pretty helpful for helping Multani get through. Next we have Willow Satyr, which is the strangest card that I have in here. But the reason why it's strange is it's not because of the actual card, because it's really good, but the fact that mono green has access to this. Its ability is it can remain tapped during your untap step, and then the ability is tap, gain control of target legendary creature for as long as Willow Satyr is tapped. So essentially what we have is a sort of temptation for commanders and other legendary creatures in mono green. So yeah, it's a really silly card. The fact that it exists is hilarious, and it has proven to be a very worthy addition to this deck. Next is Harmonize. Pretty simple. Draw 3 for 4 mana. Next we have Garruk Wildspeaker. A lot of untapping Gaia's Cradle is pretty nice, obviously, and I have Mai's games with his ultimate. But yeah, most of the time he's just helping with mana. Next we have Bellowing Tangleworm. He's another card that helps Multani get through by giving him Intimidate, as well as all my other creatures. So it kind of limits a lot of people's blocking potential. Next we have Garruk's Pack Leader. A nice way to draw some additional cards with a lot of the creatures we play being more than 3 power. And it's really nice with when I have with Wolfbriar Elemental sometimes, because if I have Wolfbriar Elemental and like a Gauntlet of Power or Cage Sun in play, then every single wolf draws me a card. So I've won games off that interaction before. Next we have Genesis. He's the king of the long game if he's ever in your graveyard. Rebuying all of your creatures every turn, or not all of your creatures, but rebuying a creature every turn is really good way to stay in a very long game. And obviously he can get to DR pretty easily with Greater Good and other things like that. Next we have Asceticism. It's a pretty nice big blanket protection card. Obviously Multani doesn't need it, but cards like Raphelos and Primeval Titan do. And the Regenerate clause sometimes is relevant, mostly for combat. I mean, obviously it doesn't do anything against Wrath of God and Damnation, but I mean, like I said, sometimes it is relevant. Now we're on to like the big fat of the deck. These are the big spells that generally is what I'm casting to win the game with, once I get a lot of mana with my ramp spells and whatnot. So first we have Omnath. He's one of the other legendary creatures in the deck. I like using him as upwelling sometimes when I'm struggling on mana, to be able to store mana for turns and then use it later to cast my big things. Generally don't swing with him too much, because that's just asking for trouble. But he's still a pretty nice card to have. Next we have Wolfbriar Elemental. This guy's pretty important because he's a really nice mana sink that I could Whirly Tutor for. But yeah, so yeah, he just makes a lot of wolves. Next we have Root Awakening. Half the time I'm casting this as basically a turnabout for lands. Being able to easily add 8 to 10 mana depending on like how many lands I have and how many mana doublers are out. So it's a really important card, and I have killed people with entwining this before too as well. Next we have Cloud Thresher. There used to be a lot more anti-flying in the deck because I had one of my friends, he was playing a Tanab deck and then quickly figured out that just by playing a Tanab and attacking several times that he could win. So I ended up adding a lot of anti-flying, but this pretty much has been whittled down to Cloud Thresher. I like him because he can sweep out like flying tokens, like Pegasus tokens from Sacred Mesa, and the fact that he's really big for his mana cost. I mean, he's a 7/7 for 6 and has flash. You can really surprise people and take out some creatures with it. Next we have Lurking Predators. Anyone who has played with Lurking Predators can tell you that this is a must kill, and the longer this stays in play, the worse it gets for any opponent. I have around 40 creatures in the deck, so the fact that I'm hitting it probably 50% of the time, I mean, not exactly 50%, but the fact that it's close to that, I mean, means that you need to get rid of it. Next we have Kamal Fisicrosa. This guy is an excellent card. He often is a cause for winning lots of games by himself because of his multiple overrun ability that you can activate many times in a single turn. And the fact that he's also anti-Wrath protection, because if someone tries to play Wrath of God, well, then he has an ability that's essentially green strip mine, because he just turns all your opponent's lands into creatures, and then your opponent loses that way. So it's definitely playing this card as being stuck between a rock and a hard place for your opponents. Next we have Primal Crux. He's, at least a 6/6 for 6, and definitely a lot more once he start playing other green permanents. Easily being a 10/10 or more. It's just nice to have a nice big beater. Next we got Primeval Titan. Obviously, no real green EDH deck would be complete without him. There's nothing much to be said about him except that he is just completely and utterly ridiculous in Commander. Next we have his good buddy Avenger Zendikar. I like, in terms of the token makers in this deck, the ones that I just like are the ones that make a bunch at once, like Avenger does, or Wolfbriar Elemental, because those are just, the slow token generation just doesn't really do it for me, and just, I like having instant armies, and Avenger Zendikar definitely gives you an instant army. Next we have Mulgraf Monstrosity. This relatively new addition from Innistrad is really great with Greater Good, in terms of, because it allows you to get two new creatures from your graveyard, especially if you're able to choose, because the ability is random obviously, but if you only have 2 creatures in your graveyard, and one of them is the Raphelos that died on turn 2 and the other one is Primeval Titan that got countered, well, that's pretty good if you're able just to get those 2 back. So so he's really nice with that. Next we have Thicket Elemental. You see he costs 5, and honestly he really just costs 7. He's a pretty silly card because he's essentially a mini Lurking Predators. Is that when you cast and kick, you reveal cards from the top of your library until you hit a creature and you put it on the battlefield. So obviously it's pretty random, although you can't set it up with Sensei's Divining Top or Sylvan Library. And so, you can get anything from a Joraga Treespeaker to Woolamog, honestly. So, he's a pretty fun card that I have. Next we have Spearbreaker Behemoth. Making a lot of my creatures indestructible is nice. Unfortunately, he doesn't make Multani indestructible because I can't target him. But nonetheless, he's still pretty good at protecting a lot of my nice creatures like Primeval Titan and Avenger Zendikar, etc. We have Praetor's Council. Definitely one of the wonderful spells that you can cast late game. Even when you just get back a bunch of ramp cards with it, just the fact that you get back those cards and you get up to a lot more mana, and now that you have no max hand size, then you can really start using Greater Good and the like to their fullest potential. This card is a really great addition. Next we have Drazi Conscription. I like this because I think it's really amusing when I stick this on a planet token or Eternal Witness or Joraga Treespeaker, all of which I've done. In fact, this actually even made its way onto Multani at one point. That involved humility, basically, which is pretty funny. Once the humility went away, that having this on Multani was pretty awesome. So yeah, just think of it as the 8-mana haste Eldrazi, and it definitely surprises people because, you know, it's essentially, since you're putting on a creature that doesn't have Summoning Sickness, they're attacking them this turn with it most likely, and you know, just trying to find a way to deal with it obviously is important. We have Ulamog. He's the quintessential creature. I mean, I think he's a little too good for EDH, mostly because of just the fact that he's indestructible and kills a permanent that, you know, might have been otherwise able to deal with Ulamog. But I guess I just speak from the experience of decks that are way more trying to cast it, like Captain Sisay or something similar, where obviously they're a lot more consistent with finding Ulamog, whereas for me, most of the time I'm just happy to draw it. So, but nonetheless, Ulamog is a pretty nice one to have at the top of the curve with. Now we're on to X spells, which we first have Gelatinous Genesis. This is the essentially exponential card, really. The fact that the more once you hit about 10 mana, this card starts becoming very, very good at what it does. Because I mean, 5/5/5s is really nice and can kill people in 2 turns. 6/6/6s will definitely kill someone. And so once you get up to, yeah, I guess that's 13 mana. Once you get up to 13 mana, this becomes lethal to somebody, especially if you have Concordant Crossroads. I like it. And finally, we have Genesis Wave. No mono green deck would be complete without this card, and definitely have won many a game off of a really big Genesis Wave. Especially when you can chain multiple Genesis Waves if you hit Eternal Witness and a bunch of lands and mana doublers. Yeah, it's pretty awesome card. Yeah, nothing much to be said about that. Thanks for watching this Multani Maro-Sorcerer Commander deck preview. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to Commander decks on YouTube. Thanks again for watching.